and welcome to another episode of TT Online Community Voices, where agencies of government and non-governmental agencies will discuss pertinent issues that affect citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. This is a program of the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. Today's episode, we look at abuse, entitled You Are Not Alone, Recognizing Abuse, Seeking Solace, and Securing Support. On today's panel, we have the esteemed pleasure of having with us Inspector Stanley of the Ministry of National Security Gender-Based Unit, Ms. Diane Lewis, Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, and Ms. Maria O'Brien, Mindwise Project. Welcome, guys.
It's a pleasure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be looking at abuse, which is a topic that is, have affected a lot of people.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of you represent different agencies, different projects, looking at abuse, not just the victims, but the perpetrator. So my first question to the panel is, what is gender-based violence, and how is it different from domestic violence? I'll throw that question over to National Security.
Sure. There's no major difference between gender-based violence and domestic violence. That is to say, violence, where the violence occurs in a domestic setting, in the home, amongst intimate partners, amongst persons who had relationships, those relationships probably dissolve. So for instance, let's say a man had promised to marry a woman, but the relationship, it didn't mature into marriage, but they fall out. We still consider, according to the law, that that falls within the area of gender-based violence if perhaps some type of violence was to occur between that couple. So, gender-based violence and domestic violence is almost the same thing because it entails psychological abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. And once these type of abuses occurs within intimate partner relationships or relationships that involves the home, it is considered domestic violence or gender-based violence.
Do we have any other opinion on the difference between the both?
Well, I think as a survivor, but also as someone who takes a lot of feedback and calls from survivors who call us at Mindwise Project to try and find help. I do think that domestic violence, maybe it can affect not just based on gender, right? So you have children who are affected by domestic violence, you have extended family members, but it's not necessarily based on gender, right? Gender-based violence, I believe, has to center around a gender-based or gender-motivated, it's affecting someone of a specific gender or because of their gender, their targets. Yeah.
Right. I heard you mention that a lot of the times when we look at domestic violence or gender-based violence, that we more look at the adults in the situation.
Yeah. No.
And oftentimes we forget that there are children in this partner relationship that is affected. When you are looking at gender-based violence from your units, do you look at the child as part of the casework that you have to handle?
Yes, we do. We look at the children, not just the children, the elderly. The unit where I come from, the gender-based violence unit, we also pay attention to violence that occurs in the homes for the elderly, the convalescents, and so on.
Right.
So it's not that we just look at violence, like you said, for the adults. It's for the children. It's for the entire household. So once you live in a house where persons, where relationships exist, mother, father, daughter, sister, brother, son, cousin, uncle, sister-in-law, you name it, we look at any type of violence that occurs within that arrangement. And in private homes where you have caregivers who have a sense of responsibility for the persons that they take care of because of the fact that their family couldn't take care of them.
Right.
So we look at abuse from that, and I have personally, I don't want to use the word raided, but I have visited several homes in conjunction with the home of the aging department to treat with issues at some of those homes as well.
Right. And I know we have a representative from Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. When you are looking at, well, we'll delve more into the compensation part of it, but I'm trying to understand from your agency, when we are approaching clients, is there a difference for you when it comes to gender-based and domestic violence?
Well, most of our crimes will be classified according to the law, such as murder, manslaughter, wounding with intent. We don't really differentiate between gender-based violence or domestic violence, or if it was violence against a child. However, children are considered as victims, and their adult guardian or parent can apply on their behalf. For us, we know that gender-based violence is different to domestic violence based on the fact that disproportionately more women and young girls are victims of violence, as opposed to domestic abuse, which is sort of the umbrella term for violence against elderly,
Right.
violence against children, and intimate partner violence.
Right. A lot of the times there are people who say to victims of abuse, you know, how do you tell, how do you recognize telltale signs of persons who may be heading towards abuse? For example, you may be in a household, you may have a spouse. How do you tell the signs of things that they're doing around the home or around the family that suggests that violence is approaching, that abuse is beginning to happen, the telltale signs?
Well, one of the early signs you look at is the fact that the individual, the survivor, or the victim, tends to have a type of withdrawal way about him or her. They socialize less. They visit their family. Family hardly ever sees them. They are now in what you call a controlling environment. So they are not on social media. They don't have the easy access to phone and all the other things that a normal person will have. They are often, quiet. Sometimes you see them wearing long clothing to cover the abuses. They may be in the yard wearing a pair of sunglasses. You may call them and they will say, look, I can't talk to you right now. I'll call you back. Taking short calls. Sometimes they cannot take the calls. And it's a host of different things that you have to look for that is, often clear to the average person. Anybody could see that, without the physical marks, there's something taking place with you, and it needs to be addressed. Some people, because of their social status, they tend to keep it on the low. Now, when I say that, I want to tell you that domestic violence does not have a particular class or face. We have Venezuelan nationals here who we are, the gender-based violence unit, are dealing with episodes of investigations where some of these Venezuelan nationals have reported incidents of violence. We have persons who they want to keep their name out of it. And well-to-do persons as well. But we at the gender-based violence unit focus on confidentiality. Because what happens is that some people tend to clam up when their business comes out in the open. So the officers are trained in such a way to move them away from the regular environment where we deal with some of the other victims and try to bring them in an atmosphere where they feel free to speak, to talk, to communicate and explain what has happened to them. Because a gender-based survivor is a person who has become very fragile. They have lost a lot of confidence in themselves, especially if the violence has been occurring for more than a decade. And we have instances where women have told us they have been experiencing violence for more than 20 years. But for somehow they survive and they sustain it, and for many reasons. And family members, children grow up seeing it, neighbors see it, and said nothing to this very day.
Mr. O'Brien, I know you mentioned that your representation today is twofold. You're representing an organization, but you're also representing yourself, a strong woman who have overcome, well, the road to overcoming is an ongoing process for you.
It's so funny. He was just bringing back so many memories, just talking about what you were just saying. Yeah, sorry, I cut off your question.
No, that's fine.
I do feel like all I was thinking was about the ways that we sustain, in the ways that women survive domestic violence. And it's not just the mothers, because the children are almost like co-conspirators in the survival, you know? I remember situations where, as a group, everyone outside of the perpetrator in the house is planning on how to keep that perpetrator quiet, how to keep them satisfied, how to keep them peaceful. You know, at any sign that that perpetrator is unhappy might show, you know, I remember telling someone the moment I came home from school, when I walked into the house, I knew whether or not there was going to be a row that night, just from the state of the house, yeah? And that's any person that grows up in violence, that you become programmed to tiptoe. You're always walking on ice. You're always walking on ice, but you become an expert at walking on ice.
Wow.
That's how women survive it for 20 years, 30 years. They figure out the programming, but the reality is that the way that anger works, the way that violence works, the way that trauma works is that it's not a situation that stays under control for very long. You know, so you might be able... I remember one time when, as a kid, I remembered having several months without any violence. And I remember telling Mom, I was like, we must be doing something right because we haven't had any fights for so long. And then within 1 month, everything just... the tables just flipped on us. So everything that you just said just resonated with me so deeply. It brought back so many memories of continuous, persistent fear that designs the life of the victim. You know, this fear becomes the drum that we walk to, you know? So it's very important service that you do, Inspector.
Another discussion that you often hear is why stay? Yeah. You're going through all this hurt, this pain, disrespected. Why do women, and we say women, but to an extent men as well, because there are men out there who are being abused. Why are they staying?
We often ask that question to most of the survivors. And in doing so, we offer them to go to safe houses. Some of them take up the offer, but a lot of them, you know, say, look, it is not so bad. You know, and they want to stay for the children. Some of the victims are not working, so they stay for financial reasons. Some have a family policy, and this is one of the greatest. Mothers will tell their daughters, look, I went through that with your father, you know. So write it out. Write it out. Because it is not good for our family name to be in the court with divorces and so on. I'm like, seriously?
Yeah.
So some of the daughters, some of the women, the younger women, stay in relationship because they have been advised by other family members that is part of it. And this is what this is what has me a bit perplexed, because how could violence be part of a relationship? So there seems to, from what we gather now, is that some women, some victims, some survivors have accepted domestic violence as a way of life in their relationship.
It's what they know. So like, let's say, I was actually having this conversation with my driver this past week, talking about someone that we know that's trapped in a violent relationship. And something my sister said to me, because she was one of the first survivors in my family, she said, a person can't fight against something, can't seek something that they don't know. So if in that relationship with the person that they're in love with, and very often I've found that the long-lasting violent relationships that I know in my community are people who've been together for a very long time. So they have been taught that this is what love looks like. Love hurts. And, you know, maybe it's okay if it hurts because he loves me anyway. You know what I mean? They become programmed, as you rightly said, to accept it, but it also becomes how they see love as normal.
Yeah. And in Trinidad and Tobago, and I think worldwide, a lot of the times victims are afraid because of community, how the community will view them. And so a lot of the time they shy away from reporting cases or even seeking compensation. When persons come to make their reports at your agency, how do you ascertain the real cause as to why they are staying? Because some may say they stay for love. Others may stay because of they want to protect the children. Some may stay because of finances. Some may stay because of religion. What is the more prominent reasons you find in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of persons who come to the compensation board for redress?
Well, because we're a victim-oriented or victim advocacy agency, I wouldn't phrase it as why do victims stay, but rather why do victims find difficulty in leaving? Because I don't think it's that anybody wants to stay in an abusive relationship. And it's a number of reasons, as we just discussed, you know, fear of the shame, fear of even your abuser coming back to abuse you, to make you return to the home, right? There's also the cultural expectation that, you know, we need to stay together in a long-lasting marriage because culturally, especially in the Caribbean, we value long-lasting relationships. No matter how dysfunctional they look, you must stay until the end of it, you know? As if it's a personal achievement to have that and to keep the family unit together. Many victims, well, statistically, we know that it takes a victim on average 7 times to leave, 7 times leaving before they actually leave for the final time.
Wow.
So it's not that you didn't want to leave because you tried to leave before, but there are reasons why they may keep going, returning to the home. There's also, well, when you spoke of the Venezuelan immigrants, there's also that language barrier and that immigration status. You know, if I leave this abusive relationship, I have no way. And that's a lack of resources and dependency. There's also the issue of codependency, where one person needs to be needed and the other person needs that person. So there are several reasons that you could delve into of why it takes victims a while to leave or why they find difficulty in leaving the relationship.
How does a person, and when we say person, we're looking at both male and female, within their psyche, look at another individual and decide, okay, I need to exert this type of power on this individual to the point where I will hit, I will kick, I will spit on them, I will do whatever I have to do to degrade them, but next day we get up and I love you. How does that happen within an individual that causes them to be a perpetrator of abuse?
It's an excellent question.
I love that question. And just before we came on set here, I was speaking to our friend about intergenerational or transgenerational trauma. And it is clear that there's a thing that people say a long time, children live what they learn. So if you teach your child, if your child, let's say growing up in the 80s or the 70s, and he or she is experiencing mommy hitting daddy or mommy cursing daddy or that, vice versa, it is obvious that that is what that child would learn to do when he becomes an adult. and has his relationships. And it becomes something that is easily adapted to. Because when we interview some of the persons involved, let's say the perpetrator and the victim or the survivor, we always ask, where were the children? Because if the violence, any form of violence occurs and the children are within close proximity, that is a separate charge by itself. We're now going under the Children's Act, right? Yeah. Cruelty. So we often ask children, where were the children at the time? And you will be surprised to know that the children that we encounter are often expert witnesses, 8-year-old and 7-year-old giving you a proper account of what transpired, what daddy said, what mommy said, and what daddy did. Mm-hmm. And it's heartbreaking to see that these children are being exposed to this type of behavior, so that one will expect that when you see this now, these children must go through some form of counseling. I know some schools have good counseling departments that help some of the children treat with intergenerational trauma. Yeah. And they try their best to help them grow from it, but some of them grow into it. Mm-hmm. We have adult male walking around here, decent men, and they will speak to you dressed neatly, but when they get home, they are a demon. They have two faces. They are a demon, and you will be shocked to see who are some of these people. And when you look at the history of some of these men and some women, not much, you recognize that they would have gone through a cycle or have been exposed to a series, not just once, domestic violence.
Yeah. Something, while you're talking about the intergenerational trauma and the inherited trauma and the cycles of the GBV, I think it's important to also mention the sexual violence that also takes place within GBV. So, and that type of inherited trauma in particular, I don't know very many women who I'm close to who have opened up with me that way, who haven't experienced sexual violence in their home, either from an uncle or a father figure or a friend of the family. And I do believe that it's important to talk about that as well, because it's not just beatings, it's rape, you know. And one of our co-directors, Stacey Camacho, she talks about this really, really well. She talks about intergenerational trauma being secrets. It's secrets that get passed on from generation to generation. So your father used to rape your sister, so you hide that, but then you also pick up the behavior of thinking that that's okay. It's kept quiet, it's insulated behavior. Your father beats your mother wakes up every morning with a black eye while she's making his coffee. You know, that becomes a secret. You don't talk about it, it doesn't leave the house. And that's really what allows intergenerational trauma to continue, is that it's insulated. It's not investigated. And that's why the law and the police play such a huge role in uncovering some of this. You know, like you talking to those kids. I've never had a police officer talk to me when I was a kid. When I was a kid, police would come to the house. The children would be one way, but they would talk to the adults. So that seems to be, that's an excellent thing that you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I was about to ask before you, you spoke, I was about to ask in Trinidad and Tobago, because I want to zero in on Trinidad and Tobago. When we look at gender-based violence, what is the link between a child who may have been exposed to gender-based violence as a child and grows up now to be an adult and is now a perpetrator of the very thing that they experienced when they were a child? How is that linked between childhood and adulthood?
I will say because of what the child has been exposed to. You see, for instance, different cultures, I will say, even in this country, view women differently. And sometimes the way we have raised some of our men, it sort of belittled some of our women. So the man is in charge, the man is the boss, and the woman has to say or abide by whatever he says. They have very little say in the house. So when you start to practice that, right, instead of ensuring that the man and the woman grow as partners and work together to build the home, to maintain the home. Once you start to separate the two and showing the man in charge, because you remember long ago, women were at home. It's not like now a lot of women are doing things that men did 20, 25 years ago. As a matter of fact, I attended a funeral for a family member last Monday, and the woman who drove the hearse, the person who drove the hearse was a woman.
Wow.
She managed everything for herself. She had the operating, the casket. I was like, really? So women have come a long way, and they are more independent. They are stronger. So what happens when you meet? What happens is that you meet in a culture clash. We dealt with a couple. Man has a good job, but the woman has an even better job. And he found nothing else important to say about the woman. You're fat. He started to go down the road about size discrimination. You're so fat. And, he keeps singing that song in her head, and now that is a form of abuse.
Right.
So I personally sat with him, and we spoke for a while, and I tried to get the genesis of this fat talk, that behavior. He wasn't even aware that it's a form of abuse. So I started asking, so we have a thing now, we'll ask, well, how you grew up, where you grew up. Did you grow up with your parents? What was life like? How did you play? What kind of friends you have? What do you do? How do you socialize? And when you get the history by speaking with some of these individuals, you realize, hey, they have been brainwashed somehow and actually trained themselves or taught the wrong thing. So then they become an adult and they think this is the norm. It is the norm to spit on people. Nothing wrong with hitting my woman to slap or my wife to cough in she face. That is part of it. That is how we just get respect. So we realize that what has been accepted by some of the families and some of the societies and some of the religions, is actually offensive to some of the women who have been enjoying this thing for decades. So we are about reaching out to the children and the younger people and telling them, look, this is not the way. This woman or this man is your partner. And this is how you ought to live. So that is why I was explaining earlier before we came on set. Whenever we come across couples who don't actually require some serious police intervention, that means taking you to the court, charging, and so on, we will take your name, put it in a register. We will spend hours with you speaking with you hours. We will recommend counseling through the Victim Witness and Support Unit or through one of our other NGOs who will do counseling with the couples. And even though we have COVID, some of these sessions are done virtually. And then the officers will go back and forth and check up on you for at least 1 year. So that helps, we show them the side of how things should be done. And, show the woman, look, you need to do this, you need to try this. Our relationship has some compromise in it and so on. And we work with a number of couples in Trinidad and Tobago towards restoring a better relationship in the home and for them to set a better example for their children and take away that possibility of intergenerational trauma.
I heard you just talk about reporting, right? And I know that a lot of victims always talk about going to the police stations and attempting to make a report, the attitudes of the police officer, sometimes it might be a little aggressive. And then on the other hand, if you speak to a police officer, they will tell you, you know, how many times they had to go to the home, how many times they came to the house, because a report was made. But then when they are told, you know, you need to actually make it something into a case, the victim refuses to do that. And so I remember hearing one police officer saying, the next time we have to come to this house, whether you want to make it a case or not, we're going to make it a case because we're tired coming to this house. How has the police evolved in terms of the response that they have given to victims of gender-based violence?
I love your question. Now, there are some victims, and I will start in reverse, there are some victims, no matter how seriously injured they are, they do not want their husband or boyfriend charged. Because with all the violence that is taking place, for some reason, some of the survivors have love for the perpetrator. They have love for their husbands and so on. But when we see, once there's evidence, so let's say this victim has a broken hand, a broken jaw, a chopped wound, or something like that, we cannot just say, look here, we're going to be not taking any action. You know? Especially if the injury is of serious bodily harm, we will take action. We will talk to the victim and say, look, ma'am, we just cannot walk away and leave you with this gaping wound or broken elbow or broken arm. It is important for us to take action. Yeah. And we will take that action with the guidance of the Director of Public Prosecution. Good. The other part of the question is about the conduct of our police officers. Now, over the years, over the past, I will say past 10 years, the police service have been going through different forms of transformation. And lately, we are embarking on, we are going into areas of trauma awareness and trauma responsive. So gone are the days where you have officers, when you walk into the reception area, we have changed the name of that area from charge room to reception area. So you walk into the reception area of any police precinct or department, and you make a report. The officers are being trained in the academy to respond respectfully and with empathy to a number of the victims and survivors who come in. Added to that, we have increased the ways in which you can communicate with the police. There's 800 TTPS, 800 SAVE. We still have 999, 911. We have 800 SAVE. We have online reporting as well. We have online reporting. So it is not to say that a report will never be dealt with, especially in the areas of domestic violence. Because the way the domestic violence unit is set up, all the inspectors have what you call an overview on conduct and control over each and every report of domestic violence that is made to the TTPS. So a constable cannot get a report and he pushes it under the carpet. That is why we also advise that citizens get a citizen report, a citizen receipt whenever they make that report. So we have tried to cover all the bases to make it easier for citizens to make report and for us to treat with any forms of domestic violence, whether it's obscene language, whether the language is abusive, whether it's shouting, playing the music too loud. You know, all these things, because it starts as small as a mustard seed. And then if it's not dealt with, it grows into a big tree, and sometimes it's uncontrollable. So before it reaches that stage, we get involved. It could be as simple as it is, we get involved.
Ms. Lewis, the question I wanted to ask is, we're having this discussion, and we do not want the viewers to perceive that the discussions that we are having is only lean towards females.
Okay.
And I want us to discuss a little bit about males, the males who may be victims of domestic violence. And both persons on the panel can answer this question. From your agency, what are the statistics like in terms of males actually reporting abuse?
For me, I will say 2%.
3%? 2%? 3%?
2? No, I mean, I don't, I think most of the males that I'm thinking about are children. So, so like the young people, the young men in our society, I think I would expect the numbers to be higher for domestic violence, not intimate partner violence. Like domestic violence, I would imagine young boys would be, the numbers would be pretty high in our culture, especially.
But I'm looking at there are men who are hit. There are men who get kicked. There are men who go through financial abuse. There are men who go through as much abuse as women do. So I'm trying to find out in Trinidad and Tobago, with the culture that we have, how has that been in terms of reporting? Because a man will tell you, I would not go to a police station and stand before another man and say, my wife is beating me. I feel demasculated because the police officer will probably laugh at me.
And therein lies the problem, because a lot of men are so egotistical that, just like you said, they find it difficult to come into a station and make a report and say, look, this is something. But the good thing about it, there are some men who have gone the distance. And they have gone the distance because we have started telling them, listen to me. You may be emasculated for 10 years. You may be a victim for a decade. But it takes about 10 seconds for you now to be a perpetrator. Because according to Bob Marley, every day the bucket goes to the well, one day it will drop out. So you're going through this over and over, and your friends telling you, boy, why are you taking that? And then you just lash out. And that day you lash out, you may cause serious injury or harm. So we advise all men, make a report if you have been the victim of domestic violence. What applies to the woman also applies to the men. And I remember a Friday that the superintendent had to call me to go and arrest a woman with other female officers who would have breached a protection order. And the man went all the way to the court. And that is just one out of the 100 reports that we receive. But we know for a fact, we have seen men with injuries. And we say, so, he said, no, that is a small thing. Nothing happened, I can deal with that. And they remain with their ego and their pride, and they say nothing until the tables turn. And then they end up on the other side of the prison gate.
In liaising with CAPA, which is the statistics unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Force, you would have seen that in 2020, 70% of the homicide victims that were IPV related were females, but 30% were males, which is quite a high number. This is estimated figures. And then in 2021, from January to August of 2021, 64% of the victims were female. Once again, this is homicide-related victims. And 36 were males, with the most recent victim being an elderly man who was killed by his intimate partner, who was a female. And this would have been up to August 2021 this year. I must say, with the beginning of the gender-based violence unit, there has been an increase in reports to the police from male victims. In terms of coming to the criminal injuries for compensation, I think that's another story because culturally it would be frowned upon. You know, you're a man, and once again we have those toxic masculinity traits then that, you know, we feed to our men, that you can't take a little lash or something like that. And they are actually being verbally abused, physically abused, sexually abused even. And this is for adult males only. Let's not even get into younger children who are males.
My next question is, representing your various organizations, what are some of the resources that you have available for both the victim and the perpetrator. So we'll start off with compensation board.
All right, so the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board of Trinidad and Tobago offers financial compensation to victims, all victims of violent crimes. You must have a police report of the incident, and the application for compensation must be filed within 1 year of the incident occurring. In terms of, we don't branch it off as in domestic violence victim versus other types of victim, but instead, as I said before, we look at wounding with intent, murder, manslaughter. We compensate victims who are alive. Those are the primary victims who would have experienced the direct violence, as well as secondary victims who are also children, dependents, spouses of those who were murdered.
We at Mindwise Project, we are one of the mental health and psychosocial partners of Trinidad and Tobago. And together with the MHPSS network, we have developed a platform called FindCareTT.com. And on FindCareTT.com, victims and perpetrators can access free psychosocial services that are being offered by agencies that have come together to respond not just to COVID-19 pandemic, but to increasing rates of violence, increasing rates of mental health crisis that have also come out of the pandemic. But, you know, so yes, I do believe that the number one thing I wanted to leave today saying is that mental health treatment, therapy is an important thing to leave this conversation with. It's not just a matter of making reports. It's not just a matter for families to separate or from the perpetrators. You actually have to heal the PTSD, heal the trauma, heal the relationships with themselves and with others, you know? So I do hope that if anyone is seeking free psychosocial support, you can visit FindCareTT.com to see what's available.
The TTPS have continued partnership with different NGOs. CADV, my friend there, Victim and Witness Support Unit, the safe houses, even the magistrate court, where what is important, what we have seen making use of a lot is the protection orders. The protection orders has been a staple for the domestic violence unit, and it is used by a lot of persons, and it has become very effective. So those are some of the resources. We have also opened up different avenues in terms of communication for victims. And I must say that the Victim Witness and Support Unit has been doing an excellent job in terms of helping some of the survivors with mental health issues, helping them to recuperate from the trauma they would have gone through as a result of domestic violence, and they do an excellent job where that is concerned. And we have seen, you know, some of the survivors really become survivors, and they want to volunteer, they want to be the voice of the gender-based violence unit because they have experienced, you know, some sort of success and reward and comfort by the way we do things, which has been different from the past 10 or 20 years ago. So things are much different now. I must say that it has been improved. I myself have been impressed by the quality of the officers. You know, there's a lot of training that is being done. For the first time, I'm seeing that officers are going through periods of training where mental health concerns, they are dealing with the superintendent provides sessions for officers to treat with secondary trauma.
Okay.
For the officers. So the officers are always ready and prepared to go with victim after victim. And in some cases, we are dealing with something like 14 reports
A day?
per day.
What?
Wow.
Right?
That's
Throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Could be more.
Wow.
So the structure that is in place to treat with mental health, and especially in this pandemic where the officers were not getting leave, getting time off with your family. I commend the executive of the TTPS for their concerns and how they are dealing with some of these things. And the most important thing is that we are showing a little more empathy and compassion for victims of domestic violence.
Well, we know that abuse is something that have affected most of us, if not a family member, a co-worker, a friend, and it's a topic that we can stay a whole day talking about it because we want to make sure that citizens of Trinidad and Tobago get the information. I want to thank my panel for being here, Inspector Stanley, Ms. O'Brien, Ms. Lewis. Thank you very, very much for an insightful discussion. Again, we want to urge you to share. Make sure and share this information. This brings us to the end of another episode of TT Online Community Voices.